All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to DADCAW 3, and it is currently 2:37 in the afternoon of Saturday, December 28th, 2019. So, last week or so has been fairly hectic. Of course, it was the holiday week. It was the week of Christmas, and now we are into Christmas crap, map crap, episode 2, season 3, all that good shit. So, lots of threes going around. One of the things that I was pretty happy with in terms of this past week is that I've been able to continue the streaming schedule and the daily grind, and I've been adapting to working in a fairly physical job, even though it's very easy. Still involves you walking around quite a bit and moving packages of varying weight and girth, and all that stuff. So, been adapting to that, trying my best to stay sane, stay productive. But I won't lie, it has definitely taken a toll. And I suppose that can be a good enough topic for today's DADCAW, because one of the things that I have been thinking about is how to maximize my ability to be productive, despite the fact that I am indeed, giving up 6 to 8 hours of my day at least 4 times a week, if not more. Now, for most people who work jobs and work 8 hours plus a day and do that 5 days a week, you're probably listening to me and wondering what the fuck I could possibly be complaining about. But suffice it to say, I'm not really the kind of guy that likes to do a lot of work when it comes to actual, working, gainful employment, I suppose you could call it. It's not because I am a communist. I simply just, I feel like it would be great if I could generate enough income just to survive. I don't need anything fancy. I just need 2 monitors and an internet connection and obviously my computer and wear and tear on the parts. I'm sure I'm going to need to replace some of those. So certainly saying that there's some drawbacks to not being gainfully employed and only barely making ends meet. And those drawbacks are, if something happens, you're fucked. But aside from that, you obviously live a roughshod life in that sense, and that is what it is. But for me, I really just look at it like somebody who wants to put all of their time and effort and passion that they can possibly muster. And it turns out I'm pretty good at that, mustering all that. They want to put it all into their work. And anything that gets in the way of that is obviously going to be met with, at the very least, reluctance, if not outright sort of just malcontent. So I suppose in that sense, it makes sense. It's very clear why I would be opposed to doing this sort of work. But honestly, it's very, very basic. It's very simple. And most crucially, I get to make my own schedule. That was really what I was worried about the most, is trying to adapt to a schedule that would be changing all the time. Whereas in this case, if anything is changed, it's because I manually went in and said, I want more or less hours this week. And so it's pretty nice in that sense. It's all self-driven. It's pretty good. And I work at basically a grocery store, for those who missed it. I'm doing Instacart work. So if you're not familiar with Instacart, it's like you tell somebody else to shop for your groceries, and that somebody else is me. So a giant list of your groceries comes through the app, and then I just take a bunch of pictures of items that I find, and more often than not, I can't find at least one of the items in the order because they're out of it or I'm incompetent. And so I just say, hey, I replaced it with this. It's very interesting as well because it's sort of, because you're time-based, they want you to be doing this in a speedy fashion so that you can do as many orders as possible. Because it is time-based, they do want you to be mincing words with the customer. They want you to be polite, but they also want you to be sort of firm and lengthy maybe. And, not lengthy. And they basically want you to state what you've done instead of leaving it as an open-ended question. Because more often than not, customers are reading that text and they're like, okay. Instead of they're not sure if they can ask me to do something else. They're not sure if they can ask for another replacement because I just say, I've replaced it with this. And it's not even like a question mark at the end. I've replaced it with this? Question mark? It's nothing. That's what I say. And they're like, okay. Or they don't say anything. Although I get some satisfaction out of the fact that when they do respond to it, they have the option to mark it with a check mark. And that's exactly what I do on Discord all day. So it works out. And that's another element of the job that I really like as well, because I can be on Discord all day reacting checkmark to people because I'm literally using my phone. It's the only job I've ever had where they mandate that you use your phone. And so it's not only expected, it's like it's actually mandatory that you must be on your phone on company time. And most often, at least lately, business has been fairly slow, which is a double-edged sword. On one hand, time is not moving as fast as I would like it to. But on the other hand, I'm being paid to stand around doing nothing. So that is kind of a bullshit job. It edges into that territory. And if you're not familiar with bullshit jobs, I think there's a book called Bullshit Jobs. I don't know. I heard about it on Joe Rogan. But there's a sort of idea that if you have people pouring water into a cup and then pouring that cup into another cup and doing that forever, is basically doing nothing. They're not justifying their income and they're not justifying their position in the company. They're not justifying their existence. So of course they're going to be miserable. And I think that a variant of that actually goes into why there's so many people out there who always say that they've got to shit on company time. You know what I mean? Which I've done already so far. It's very simple because there's so much downtime sometimes that it's like, worst comes to worst, you just tell the app you're taking a break if you get an order during that because you get to do that. So it's actually pretty cool. It's very, very chill, very relaxed. And we're kind of like a bunch of rogues, a bunch of rock stars, because again, we're in a grocery store. So we're just sitting there. Like sometimes we're not even in uniform because who gives a fuck? All of our employees, like all of our coworkers know who we are and what we're doing. And most of the Wegmans employees also know that, the store employees. And so they come in and they're like, they're working these 10-hour shifts. Meanwhile, we're just going in there. We get there after they've started and we leave before they do. It's just must be a slap in the face to them because we pick our own hours and we don't get paid as much as them probably, but we get paid enough that it's worthwhile. So that's been my experience lately. And yeah, so really the only thing that I had to overcome was the raw numbers of hours that I was giving up that it normally would have been able to go into more streams, more YouTube content that wasn't just me modding. Like that's one of the reasons why I haven't done too much custom campaign playthroughs or let's plays, is because I actually haven't been able to. I haven't had the time. I've only had the time to do the short 2 to 3 hour streams in the mornings. And really, I guess I just have to adapt my sleep schedule so that I can get up earlier to do more of that or something. But we'll see how it goes. I hope it hasn't been too boring for those people who are more interested in the gameplay content, the commentated Let's Play stuff. If you're waiting for that, then, I also am waiting for that, so I sympathize with your plight. But unfortunately right now, I don't know when the waiting will end. So you'll know when I do, because that'll be the same day that I figure out, I can stream Wicked Reality today or something. It doesn't help, though, that Wicked Reality is such a fucking terrible project that I never want to play it again. But we'll see what happens. I can definitely start to sense that I'm running out of things to say on this topic, so we'll try to pivot to a different topic. Here's the one that might be interesting for you people out there who are more interested in the whole modding thing and more interested in making your own projects. I've been thinking lately that one of the things that I want to do with Todd Bourne, which is the project that I've been doing most of the modding streams for lately, is obviously I want to make a micro section or a micro component of it where my brother can play as just himself and maybe like some summons or something. But he's basically playing like an ARPG or something like that. And there's not really as much gear, but there's equipment that he can buy. And that equipment is like a way for him to, spend money that he earns by killing things or something. I haven't figured out the economy, but I have figured out that obviously if it's just a macro map with one guy playing as a hero and the other players are AI or they're human players, but they're all playing macro, then, when it's alongside that, there's really not much for the micro player to do unless you add some other opponent that's specifically designed to interact with the micro player. And I don't know what exactly that would look like, because on one level, the micro player might just hide inside one of the macro player's bases, and then suddenly that macro player has to deal with more enemies or something. But you can assume that he wouldn't be like griefing the macro players. You would hope anyway. And so maybe they could just sniff him out and try to attack him. Or maybe it would just simply spawn a set of enemies that would only appear if the micro player was present. And if the micro player was present, they would not move necessarily directly towards the micro player, but they'd be expanding outward and trying to stop the macro players from having such precedence on the map. And in a situation where the macro player would probably require some assistance from the micro player in order to proceed, because they're beset upon by more foes than they would be if the micro player wasn't there. It's mandating interaction and engagement, based on threatening your allies if you are the microplayer in this example. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. I really don't think that should be the only thing that mandates that sort of interaction, but I kind of like the idea that there'd be some forces that are neutral to your enemies, to the anime forces, but are hostile to the police forces, and then have the police forces, yourself included as the microplayer, sort of have to work around the existence of those neutral units that aren't there normally, but are only there when there is a microplayer. And then maybe adding some sort of variance, some sort of randomization to where the micro enemy spawners are, because indeed they wouldn't be done through triggers, but there would be some randomization where you basically have these structures that don't normally exist, and they'd be, right now I'm calling them retcon orifices because that's disgusting. And then there would be the first look at a void unit would be the void builder, and that void builder would be the only one that builds those. But the units that would pop out would be very, very basic. It would be like basic anime units or something from the Slack group. So you'd have stuff like the fanboy, the activist, the smoochy boy in the late game, and you'd mostly just be beset upon by those guys. Maybe sometimes you would have like, certain sub-faction units like the fanfiction or Reddit units, depending on the map or depending on the case. I don't really know how that I would go about justifying their existence. Perhaps they just come from the void. But the bottom line is these interdimensional enemies would only show up if the microplayer had summoned them. And you can imagine that the retconning in and of itself, the retcon orifice, right, it's only there to retcon these enemies into existence so that the microplayer has something to do. So it fits the absurdist sort of surreal vibe that I've got going on in that, where you're justifying a gameplay system that is on its face very much just a gameplay system and has no consequence to the actual story in theory. You're justifying that through the narrative and in such a way that it does kind of feel immersive in a very absurd way. Like in some senses you're laughing at it because of how dumb it is, and like you can't believe that the map maker actually put that there. But in other cases you're like, oh wow, yeah, I guess that makes sense with that faction. Like it's a weird duality where you're both, you're not immersed, but you're also immersed. At least that's what I hope will happen at the end of the day, because, as a player, you'll walk in there and you'll be like, wow, that's some wild ass shit that this guy put in here. I can't believe Pronogo did that. But at some point, hopefully it sinks into the subconscious enough that you're thinking of it more in terms of, I can't believe these void fuckers are doing this, instead of, I can't believe Pronogo is making these void fuckers do this. So hopefully at some point I transcend that barrier there, and I managed to just needle it into your subconscious. But we'll see what happens. That has been one of the things that I have been thinking about lately, though, just in general, the idea that you would be going through and playing as the microplayer, and like, what would you really be fighting? Because I can't just have you fight against other heroes. We don't have the technology for AI-controlled heroes, so I can't be doing that, which I suppose would, in theory, be an ideal, because then at least it's like enemies on an even playing field, similar to an RTS enemy, facing off against your macro ally or something, that would be what you would expect. Crack versus you and Mongo versus Darien or something like that. And then, the micro player would have his own micro enemy. But in this case, the micro enemy is just a series of spawns. It's more like an ARPG in that you're very much stronger than individual opponents. But the idea is that enemy compositions can combine to really hurt you, to take you down. So I'm hoping that I can get somewhere with that concept. Right now, I'm thinking mostly that the retcon orifices wouldn't require any resources. They'd have infinite money, but they'd be gated very heavily based on their production structure count. And the orifices would be destructible, so you could destroy them. And the orifices would spawn forth workers that would then summon the structures that you normally see as typical anime production structures. And those, in turn, would summon the combat units that you would mostly be engaging with as the micro player, and of course being attacked by and as a nuisance as the macro player. And so that's sort of my concept right now. That's my sort of idea, my MO. And I'm hoping that I'm able to do something with that, because I do think that it has some promise. Neutral, hostile, creep camp type enemies have been tried before, obviously most notably in Warcraft 3, but I feel like maybe this could be something where it's very selective. It's very much you could even call it gimmicky in a sense, where it's very deliberately there to respond to the presence of a particular kind of player that's on the map. And it's very much experimental in that sense. But I don't think that means it has no merit. I just think that it means that I have to be very careful with it. So I'm thinking about that as I look over this mapcraft map that I was working on for 4 hours earlier today. And, perhaps that'll be the first test bed for it where I end up implementing it. But I think I don't have enough time for that, probably. So just some more musings, I suppose. Anyway, I think that does it for our DADCAW today. We talked about the Todd Bourne micro Mongols, and we talked about the balancing out the work-life schedule with the streaming and the actual working. And I hope it was interesting enough to really tickle your senses. But that is the end of the third DADCAW. So, bye.